Hi everyone, and welcome back to Fresh Thinking, the podcast where we take ideas that can sound pretty intimidating on paper and unpack what they actually mean for day-to-day geology, mine planning, and resource work. I'm Jamie, Senior Geology Consultant here at Snowden Optiro, and this is part 2 of our conversation on convolution, a word that's been popping up more and more in geostatistics, machine learning workflows, and in conversations that sometimes make people quietly nod along in meetings. I'm joined again by Senior Consultant Greg, who many of you know from his work in advanced estimation and for his ability to connect signal processing, geostatistics, and geology in ways that's genuinely practical. In part 1, we focused on the foundations, what we mean by detrending, how convolution doesn't have to be complicated, and how something as simple as a moving average can be used deliberately as a trend model alongside kriging. In this episode, we're going to build on that and push things a little bit further. We'll talk about where people tend to run into trouble, how convolution shows up in convolutional neural networks, and how, or if, those tools can be combined with more geostatistical or classic geostatistical geostatistics without losing geological control. So let's get back into it. So if I love variograms, but I also want to bring in things like magnetics and structure, rasters, where do I go next?
Okay, so that's where universal kriging or kriging with external drift comes. So your drift is a function of those rasters. So conceptually, this kriging with external drift is a cousin of that trend plus residue kriging. But the trend is learned while regression on the covariates instead of a pure moving average. CNN are the nonlinear high capacity version of that idea.
Okay. So where do people tend to get tripped up when combining these methods, especially when things look really good geostatistically but feel a bit off geologically?
That happens a lot. And so a few classics is the first is edge effects, where in convolution, the trends near the boundaries can be biased because simply there's a blank data there. So and then use reflective padding or compute trends on an extended extent. You could mimic some data, on the edge, so to improve this edge effects in essence. And then the second problem is the over smoothing. Like if you use a very wide kernels, that will blur all the sharp boundaries or contacts. And if your body is very lengthy, and then keep that kernel width conservative and let the residue kriging carry the details. But this is the balance that you have to balance between how much variability you're gonna leave that for the trend modeling and how much you would leave that for the residue modeling. Then the third is stationarity assumption. So after the detrending, residues should have a roughly constant mean and shouldn't have too much variance. So if not, that means you haven't captured enough reliability in that trend modeling part. You basically left everything to the residues. Then that essentially comes back to what we see a lot of times, that people get a very messy domain data and then you directly use the kriging and ignore that assumption that kriging was designed for the domain with the stationarity.
Right.
And then the anisotropic blindness. So your moving average might be isotropic, but the geology rarely is. But there's a problem on the opposite side, that when you have when your anisotropy of your geology is not that strong, but you impose some very strong anisotropy surge or the moving window average, then a moving window or the kernel, then it can create or some non-existent trend. And this is also not what we want. So this is a part where you need to spend some time to play or do the sensitive tests to get the right roughly right size of the kernel. And yeah.
Okay, I think that's a really good example of letting structure guide the smoothing rather than letting smoothing blur the structure. So let's walk through a simple hypothetical. Say you've got a folded sequence, copper grades sampled at about 100 meter spacing along section, and magnetics that show a strong linear fabric.
Well, so then we would start it by estimating a Gaussian trend with probably 600 meters, kernel elongated along the strike, say, and then 2 to 1 anisotropy aligned to the fold axis, and then subtract that to get the residues, fit an anisotropy variogram model, then krige the residues, and then add back on top of the trend for the final grade estimation, and use the kriging variance to consider, the quality of the estimates, or for the classification or risk analysis. Then in the CNN variant, we fit magnetics, digital elevation model, curvatures, distance to the contact maps, and then initial smooth trend as channels. So those information, when we do the traditional geostatistics, we usually ignore that. After we do the domaining, we just focus on the most of the time just grade itself, or even just a single grade univariate. We dumped all those valuable information, but now using CNN, you could actually make use of those information and make them contribute, hopefully, to the estimate. But then after that, we can compare the metrics and that using that cross validation. And then if the CNN method improves, for example, the mean absolute error, or some other metrics used to measure the relative or absolute error compared to the hard data, ground truth, then that just shows you the value of using this method.
Okay. And what tools would you reach for in this situation?
So I would use, for the convolution, you get a lot of open source libraries on the website. And then, so that's not a terrifying idea. Actually, you could even demonstrate this or self-educate in the Excel to learn this, how the CNN works. And then for the variogram modeling or the kriging part, you could use any software package you like, whether you are a Dharma user, a Service user, or even there are open source libraries on website, online. And then you could use, for the CNN itself, you could use PyTorch or TensorFlow, and you could occasionally, if you really want the speed, you could make use of your GPU. If you have one in your laptop, then that could improve your computation efficiency by a large extent. And then to the validation. So validation, to me, I would like to streamline this entire workflow, or especially the validation part, while the scripting. To me, I like to use Python, and then that makes this process, A, is you can reproduce that, and B, it will make it very easy to run that multiple times and automate the process. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So a quick lightning round to wrap things up. When would you not use a moving average trend?
So when the trend is very strongly linked to the known, for example, variables, it's linked to the depth, lithology, or even temperature. So the kriging with external trend, or a regression spline may be better than a uniform smoother. Then, yeah, and if you don't know much about those details, maybe you can start with just a uniformed smoothing window.
Okay. And when would you not use a CNN?
So if you have very sparse data, very limited labels, and overall you just have a lot of uncertainty in there. And so CNN is not a magic wand that it will save you the money to get the data. So no matter what methods you use, you still need good data, large data set. And in that case, probably gonna go back to the traditional geostatistics, since that has been the very well-known tools for decades in the industry. Then you know where is the weakness and then how to explain the results.
Okay, and what's your best sanity check after detrending?
So I would plot residues by domain and then along the principal directions and see the main should be near 0. And residue variograms should be very stable, and then you shouldn't see your variogram go through the roof, or it has all those special effects, which we usually, concern about.
Okay, so here's the way I think about all of this from a resource estimation point of view. First, you can use convolution, even something as simple as a moving average, as a quick, transparent way of modeling a broader trend. Then detrend the data and use kriging to honor the spatial correlation in what's left, so the residuals. And if you've got richer multiple source data and enough samples, you can start thinking about tools like CNNs to learn more complex nonlinear relationships and structural cues, ideally with spatially aware validation, or folded into like a hybrid geostats ML workflow.
That's right.
Greg, thanks for pulling all of this together. You've managed to wrap up signal processing, geostats, and machine learning in a way that actually makes sense without making our heads spin.
Oh, wow. Anytime. Remember, the trends are the sound, residues as solos. So separate them and both can sound better.
Excellent. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a colleague who thinks that convolution is just what happens to your cables in the field truck. Greg, thanks again for walking us through this without making it feel too heavy. I'm Jamie, and this has been Rock Solid Insights.
Oh, thank you.
See you next time.